The Dark City. Commodore was originally the greatest of the webway port cities, impossibly vast and able to transport a fleet to any of the most vital planets of the Eldari Empire by virtue of its many portals. Because of the access it granted to the far-flung corners of real space, this mighty metropolis was reckoned to be the most important location in the entire webway. It was too valuable as a whole to belong to any single aspect of their empire, so it existed outside the jurisdiction of the great Eldari councils of that time. Precisely because of its autonomy, the webway city port quickly became a magnet for those that wished their deeds to remain hidden from prying eyes. The realm of Commodore expanded unstoppably as wealth flowed across its borders. It spread outward into the void, consuming other webway port cities, private estates, and sub-realms with each new expansion. It grew ever larger and more impressive as it fed on their plundered resources. Unseen, the dilettante lords who ruled its spires and dens of vice grew in status alongside their adoptive city, initiating more and more of their species into their shadowy creeds. Deep in the webway, after the fall, the groups of pleasure cult survivors came together and laid the foundations of the vast new subrealm that they named Commodore, the Dark City, which was built on the foundations of the old Commodore. As more and more Eldari survivors from other sub-realms in the webway began to arrive, they soon added their own regions to the new realm, slowly making it even larger and more heavily populated until it became what it is today, a vast domain, an infernal city of suffering and death. To this day, the DRUKHARI raid and pillage the galaxy at large from their hidden sub-realms in the webway, sowing as much misery and destruction as possible, and stealing away millions of captive slaves to their lairs within the Dark City to be exploited for their own horrible ends. They are experts in the techniques of torture, as well as mental and physical degradation, as the longer a DRUKHARI can drag out the torture of a slave, the more psychic nourishment they can take from him or her. The DRUKHARI who has recently fed upon the suffering of others shines with a cold and startling aura of power, their physical form restored to beautiful, youthful perfection, even as their soul rots within its pristine shell. A DRUKHARI who is not allowed to partake of such dark psychic energies for long enough will become a physical shadow of their former beauty, desperately hunting for a taste of misery to stave off the gnawing thirst in the depths of their own withered soul. The Satellite Realms. If a traveler were somehow to breach Commodore's runic walls, they would first bear witness to the Dark City's tributary realms, shimmering and distorting around it. 1 minute, these vassal domains glimmer in the distance. The next, they loom so close that their palaces and minarets can be seen by the naked eye. To venture unheralded past these satellite realms is to invite destruction. Many large and territorial cabals of Drukhari reside within their twisted geometries, deadly pirate bands of pitiless warriors who live only to inflict pain on others, and will suffer no intrusion on their realms. Worse things lurk in their crooked shadows, or swoop swiftly and silently through the air above in the never-ending hunt for prey. These are the hidden domains in which the Drukhari enact their vile rites and devilish schemes. Their origins lie in the tumultuous times that preceded the fall, as the cults of excess began to thrive. Their private realms in the webway flourished unseen until the largest of their number grew powerful enough to threaten Commorragh itself. However, over the course of its Terran millennia-long history, Commorragh has subsumed all of the vassal domains it has not yet destroyed. Within the gilded corridors and flesh pits of the myriad sub-realms frolic those Eldari who engineered the fall of their own species, laughing still at the warnings of their somber craft-world cousins. The rise of Asdrubael Vect. Over the millennia, Commorragh grew from its shrouded beginnings into a galactic nightmare, its expansion driven largely by the machinations of one being, Asdrubael Vect of the Cabal of the Black Heart, who rose from slavery to become the true supreme overlord of the Dark City. 4,000 standard years after the fall of the Eldari, in the time that mankind calls the 35th millennium, Commorragh underwent its greatest ordeal since its founding. The Dark City was to be subjected to a full-scale invasion by some of the Imperium's most elite warriors. This catastrophic battle saw the rule of the ancient Eldari noble houses of the city brought crashing down. They would be replaced by a city of cabals under the rule of Supreme Overlord Asdrubael Vect, the architect of this time of strife. Vect began his days as an Eldari slave. Yet through pure guile and murderous ambition, he eventually rose to become the leader of a militant organization that he named the Cabal of the Black Heart. By the time he had established this power base, he had been recognized by the Drukhari's true-born aristocracy as a genuine threat. The Cabal of the Black Heart was opposed at all turns by the most influential of High Commorragh's noble houses, Zelian, Krylach, and Lithian. So it was that Vect, ever the master of turning foe against foe to his own advantage, concocted a plan to bring the fury of the Imperium of mankind to bear against his many enemies. So audacious was this scheme that, to the eyes of most, it would have seemed like a horrific gamble. This could not have been further from the truth. Every angle had been carefully considered, every necessary loyalty bought beyond any measure of a doubt. Asdrubael Vect's plan to achieve ascendancy demonstrated that his mind was like some intricate and unstoppable clockwork machine. By the time the plan had run its course, millions had been ground between its merciless gears. Vect, meanwhile, elevated himself to a position of total supremacy, borne to unimaginable heights upon an ever-growing mountain of cooling corpses. The seeds of the Imperial invasion were sown in the region of the galaxy called the Desiderian Gulf. This area of wilderness space was well known among the human starfarers of the Segmentum Tempestus for the number of spacecraft that had disappeared within its confines. General Imperial practice was to avoid it at all costs. Unknown to the Imperium, there existed a vast portal into a main arterial of the webway within Desiderian space, shielded by holofields that made it appear to be nothing more than a shimmer in the starlight, perhaps a result of gravitational lensing. Behind this portal lurked the pirate fleets of Commodore, waiting for unwary prey. The Drukhari's noble houses preyed upon Imperial shipping lanes only rarely, in order to escape retribution. Hence, the missing ships were always considered acceptable losses, or written off as bureaucratic errors of the administratum. Vect's first move was to increase the frequency of these piratical raids tenfold. He made it his cabal's priority to capture every Imperial Navy warship and invade every human world within reach of the Desiderian portal. He tore apart the Astra Militarum regiments garrisoning the planets of the Desiderian system, devastated their fortifications, and disappeared with his living bounty into the depths of the Dark City, leaving nothing but utter ruin in his wake. This campaign saw the Cabal of the Black Heart grow rich in plunder and souls, though Vect's detractors thought him a fool for antagonizing the massive Imperial war machine. With its usual ponderous bureaucratic slowness, the Imperium eventually reacted to the disappearances in the Desiderian Gulf. A strike cruiser belonging to the Salamanders chapter of the Adeptus Astartes was close enough to investigate. It was patrolling the edges of the Gulf in search of the sacred artifacts and relics of their Primarch Vulcan. Captain Furcus of the Salamanders ordered his ship deeper into the Gulf. After a short but violent exchange with Vect's Cabalite fleet, his strike cruiser Forgehammer was crippled by haywire bombs and transported through the Desiderian portal into the heart of the Dark City, Commodore. The furore that resulted from this audacious capture set the spires of High Commodore aflame with new intrigue. A Space Marine captain was a great prize indeed, for such an individual could withstand extreme and prolonged mental and physical torture before divulging his vital secrets about Imperial defense. Before long, Vect found his Cabal's fleet in the Desiderian Gulf dwarfed by the armada of the Archon Lord Zelian. The Forgehammer, still rendered impotent by Vect's haywire field, was confiscated by Zelian, taken to High Commodore and analyzed by a long dissection process. In his arrogance, the Archon had not reckoned with the resourcefulness of the Space Marines trapped within the stricken strike cruiser. The ship's Vox communications network had been shorted out by the haywire field, but unknown to Zelian, there remained a more pervasive method of communication available to the Astartes. Captain Fergus's close friend, the gifted librarian Hestion, had sent a psychic request for aid as soon as the starship systems had been disabled. He acted as a living beacon to the rest of the Salamander's chapter, a beacon now trapped within the spires of Zellion's realm in the Dark City. When the Archon sent the elite of his warrior court to bring the Space Marines to his torture chambers, they were met with far sterner resistance than anticipated. The Drukhari found it easy to carve through the hull of the strike cruiser and gain entrance to its dark corridors, but overpowering the Space Marines proved impossible. Lit only by the flashes of bolt gun fire, a desperate battle took place within the hull of the Warhammer until Astartes and Drukhari blood had mingled upon its hull plates. Zellion was quick to realize that he had underestimated his victims. He returned the salvage rights for the Astartes starship to the Cabal of the Black Heart, appearing generous, but actually intending to seize the Space Marines once the Black Heart had suffered the losses in taking them captive. Vect readily agreed, forming small strike forces of all those warriors in his cabal whom he suspected of disloyalty, and sent them to face the strike cruiser's defenders piecemeal. His Kabbalite warriors, triumphant on dozens of worlds, march into the Warhammer without fear, but the battle lasted for solar days. Zellion was happy to let him drive his so-called Cabal to destruction, believing its Drakon to be a fool for not attacking with all the force at his disposal in a single massive assault. Vect played a waiting game, feeding the disloyal elements of his cabal to the guns of the Space Marines to buy time, and even employing Comarite mercenaries with well-known ties to Zellion's court, all of whom were soon swallowed by the violence within the human strike cruiser. On the 16th solar day of the siege, the skies above High Comarach suddenly broke open. The Salamander's chapter had received the coordinates that had led them to their beleaguered battle brothers from the librarian Hestion's psychic broadcasts. The Desiderian portal had mysteriously been left fully operational, its guards slain and its controls locked so that it could not be closed. The full fury of the Imperium of Man thundered from the crackling jade-colored webway portal directly above Archon Zellion's personal spire. Through it came starships bearing the heraldry of not only the Salamanders, but also the badges of the Howling Griffons and the Silver-Skulled chapters of Space Marines. 24 strike cruisers, each appearing like a chunk of Gothic architecture reshaped for war, hammered through the wide open portal into the shadowy skies of the Dark City. At their heart was the great battle barge, Vulcan's Wrath, an immense spacecraft with broadside batteries that could flatten whole cities. Its prow was a vast, jutting ram that ploughed straight into the spire where Zellion stood, crushing it like a hammer driven into a priceless sculpture. The Drukhari overcame their surprise quickly. From nearby Port Shard came hundreds of exotic craft, each a needle-like splinter next to the slab-like Imperial vessels, but no less deadly. Void Raven bombers and Razor-Wing jet fighters careened out of their towering hangars like bats from a cave, descending in swarms to attack each Astartes strike cruiser. Though many were destroyed by the Imperial cruisers' broadsides, others systematically targeted the larger ship's guns with focused void lance fire and sustained hits from their disintegrator cannons. The Vulcan's wrath was struck by thick blasts of electromagnetic force produced by Port Shard's salvage spars, rendering the majority of its weapon systems useless. One by one, the Imperial ship's guns were silenced. But these were Space Marines, and they were nothing if not resourceful. Ejecting from each strike cruiser came drop pods, fired with such force that they were projectile weapons in their own right. The drop pods hurtled down, smashing through DRUKHARI fighter craft and Comerite star scrapers alike, each containing a squad of Space Marines who deployed upon impact with their weapons blazing. They left pure ruin in their wake as priceless Eldari statues shattered and the spires of the Dark City fell. The Astartes' counterattack robbed the DRUKHARI of the initiative. Within only moments of the drop pod assault, the Space Marines had established a perimeter in the obsidian-paved streets of the Krylach Quarter. Though they took constant fire from Kabbalite warriors and scourgers that flew through the dark skies above, Astartes' power armor proved to be an effective barrier to the DRUKHARI's splinter weaponry. Yet it was not long before more of the Dark City's denizens joined the fight, drawn to violence and death like sharks to blood. Mass swarms of skyboard-mounted Hellions and Reaver jetbikers swooped down to rake and tear at the Space Marines, who returned fire, literally, with their Promethium-fueled flamers. The half-demon mandrakes and raider transports loaded with DRUKHARI warriors assaulted the Space Marines with claws, knives, and splinter pistols. Battle was joined from one side of High Comerach to the other, and the streets seethed with violence. Entire sections of High Comerach burned, as the invaders cut down or incinerated each new breed of horror that assaulted them. Word spread quickly through the Dark City of the human invasion, and high up in the arenas, the gladiators of the witch cults mobilized for war. The Space Marines within the city were 500 strong, almost half the size of a full chapter, and they maintained a defensive perimeter throughout the Krylach Quarter. High Archon Krylach himself led a massed charge against the Astartes, intending to crush the invaders that were destroying his personal fiefdom. Yet his rampage was ultimately halted by a stray blast from a dark lance that vaporized him where he stood. As the forge hammer lay shackled by electromagnetic force high in the spires, the battle in the skies of the Dark City intensified. Zellion's last command had been to destroy the captive human ship, no matter the cost. For if mere humans recovered his prize, the Archon's authority and that of his fellow noble-born peers would be shattered forever. Flights of winged scourgers, armed with haywire blasters and heat lancers, began to systematically destroy the captive ship, while a fleet of Ravager gunships forced the Space Marines who sought to rescue the vessel's battle brothers back into cover. Then, in a storm of light generated by their teleportation technology, Terminators from the Salamander's first company teleported directly onto the hull of the Forgehammer and returned fire. The Scourgers were driven back, and Captain Furcus seized his chance. His warriors emerged from cover as a single force, sending a crack missile soaring into each of the 9 towering spars that held his craft captive with their beams of electromagnetic force. Miraculously, each missile triggered a chain reaction of explosions, and the burning spars crashed down into the streets below. The librarian Hestion summoned a psychic storm of his own, a raging inferno in the shape of a flaming drake that tore the Ravager gunships out of the sky one by one. The Forgehammer had been ravaged by the DRUKHARI assault, but it was free at last from the Dark City's clutches. With a roar, the strike cruiser began to ascend into the sky and freedom. Far below, the Space Marines fighting in the Zellian Quarter were completely encircled as the full weight of Komarach was pressed against them, and warriors from dozens of DRUKHARI noble houses joined the defense of the city. Yet the Space Marines' objective had been achieved, for the Forgehammer was free. A single curt comm signal was sent, and within mere moments, the main bulk of the Marines in the Dark City teleported away in a brief burst of light. Those that had been cut off from the main assault gave their lives to buy their brethren time, or else were paralyzed by DRUKHARI hypertoxins and taken away to later fight and die as warrior slaves. Confusion reigned as the haywire fields that had shackled the Imperial spacecraft were disengaged one by one. The battle barge, Vulcan's Wrath, now joined by the badly damaged Forgehammer, fired its retros and disengaged itself from the ruins of what had been Archon Zellion's pride. The vast starship's engine blast flattened spires and star scrapers alike before the Space Marines made their escape. The entire Astartes fleet then passed through the still yawning webway portal above High Komarach and escaped triumphantly into real space. In the aftermath of the Imperial invasion, Komarach changed forever. The power vacuum left by the vanquished ancient DRUKHARI noble houses was quickly filled by Asdrubael Vect and his jubilant cabal of the Black Heart, who had proven their superiority to their rivals in the crucible of war. In the years that followed, Vect played politics like a true Machiavellian master of intrigue, forever asserting the meritocracy of the cabals over the ancient aristocracy of the Eldari noble houses. Into the yawning power vacuum stepped Asdrubael Vect and his cabal of the Black Heart. Eschewing all pretense at innocence, he ensured that word of his machinations became public. All would know that to stand in the way of Asdrubael Vect meant certain death, and in the centuries that followed, his grasp on power would inexorably tighten. And so it was that the cabal of the Black Heart rose to ascendancy over the Dark City in place of the old Eldari nobility and Archon Vect's new position as the supreme overlord of Komarach and the DRUKHARI people was sealed.